Juliette Rayner adjusted the folds of an emerald satin gown in the shimmering mirror of the Montclair Grand Hotel's powder room. The gown, far too elegant for her wallet, clung to her slim frame like it was made for her, except it wasn't. It belonged to her best friend, Delilah Fontaine, whose generosity was the only reason Juliette stood here all on the verge of re-entering a world that had once been hers. Outside, the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala was in full swing, a dazzling affair where Manhattan's most powerful sipped $1,000 champagne while pretending to care about disadvantaged youth. The irony wasn't lost on Juliette. Her own family had once been patrons of nights like this. 5 years ago, she had walked into such events, wearing designer gowns sewn just for her, her arm looped through her father's. Her name Rayner whispered with respect across the ballroom floor. But tonight, she came as Delilah's guest, a woman with a hollow bank account, wearing borrowed elegance and clutching pieces of a legacy that had cracked like old china. Her fingers lingered at her collarbone, where a small silver locket, the only thing left from her family's fortune, shimmered faintly. "You look breathtaking," Delilah whispered as they exited into the ballroom, a world once hers. The Montclair Ballroom was a monument to excess, vaulted ceilings painted with Renaissance detail, crystal chandeliers raining light onto marble floors, and walls adorned with priceless art. Conversations drifted like perfume whispers about IPOs, hedge funds, and yacht upgrades. Men in sleek tuxedos traded investment strategies. Women in diamond-encrusted gowns compared international art collections like recipe cards. Juliette moved carefully, her poise masking the unease simmering beneath her flawless expression. She had practiced this look, the effortless smile, the upward tilt of the chin, the illusion of belonging. It helped her move undetected among people who had never tasted ramen noodles for dinner or begged landlords for an extra week to make rent. "Juliette Rayner," came a voice from behind. She turned to find Evelyn Hartford, silver-haired, sharp-tongued, and a longtime friend of Juliette's late mother, a woman whose judgments came gift-wrapped in sweet tones and polished pearls. "My dear, you're radiant," Evelyn said, her smile tightening. "I hear you've taken up painting." Juliette's chin rose slightly, pride flaring in her eyes. "Yes, I'm an artist now. I paint and teach children." "How charming," Evelyn replied, the words dipped in condescension. "Art makes for a delightful hobby." Before Juliette could respond, Delilah reappeared at her side, radiant and confident. "Actually, Jules' work has been featured in 3 galleries this year. She's amazing." Evelyn nodded, already turning her attention elsewhere. "Of course, dear." Juliette stood there, swallowing the ache in her chest. Evelyn was gone, but the sting of her words lingered. When disaster struck, across the room, unseen but observant, sat Christian Maddox. He was the kind of man who dominated boardrooms and ballrooms, like founder of Maddox Innovations, one of the youngest tech billionaires in America, and tonight's principal benefactor. His black tuxedo hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, his midnight hair immaculately styled, and his dark eyes scanning the room with quiet precision. When his father, Marcus Maddox, approached him with the prospect another senator's daughter recently returned from Oxford, Christian gave a perfunctory smile. He had no interest in matchmaking deals disguised as introductions, but someone had already caught his eye. He saw her before the rest of the room did. The woman in emerald, graceful yet unguarded, reaching for a glass of champagne. And then it happened. A small catch. A heel twisted in satin. A seam ripped down her thigh with a sickening whisper of silk surrender. The dress betrayed her. Gasps rippled like waves. Heads turned. Cameras lifted. Juliette froze. She was exposed. Not indecent, but enough to draw unwanted eyes, enough to make her feel like the poor girl in a borrowed gown surrounded by wolves. But then, instead of fleeing, she lifted her chin. She gathered the torn fabric in one hand and continued walking across the ballroom as though nothing had happened. Past the gasps, past the pity, past the iPhone cameras hungry for scandal. She walked with her spine straight, her dignity intact. The unexpected gaze. Christian saw strength. He saw vulnerability forged into steel. While the crowd whispered cruel assumptions, cheap fabric, borrowed dress. Who is she really? He saw resilience. He moved, Not hurriedly, not with drama but with intent. He left his father mid-sentence, ignored the senator's daughter entirely, and walked through the murmuring crowd toward the terrace where the woman had disappeared. Outside, the night was cool. Juliet stood alone, overlooking the lights of Central Park, holding her ruined dress together with a delicate grip and immeasurable composure. "Rough evening," Christian said softly, keeping his tone non-threatening. She turned, startled, but not afraid. Her eyes widened slightly as recognition flared. She knew who he was. Everyone did. "I've had better," she replied with a faint smile. "I doubt anyone will remember by morning." "We both know that's not true." "I'm Christian," he said. "I'm Juliet Rayner." Recognition flickered across his features. Rayner. He remembered the fall of Rayner Tech, the scandal, the whispered rumors of suicide and betrayal. And suddenly, it clicked. "Robert Rayner was your father," he said, quietly, gently. Her breath hitched. She looked away. "Yes, though people remember the headlines more than the man." Christian hesitated. He remembered more than headlines. He remembered his father mentioning Rayner Tech in strategy meetings, and he remembered the unspoken guilt in Marcus Maddox's eyes every time the subject came up. "Your father was brilliant," he said. "His work on neural networks, it was a decade ahead of its time." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Two worlds collide. They stood in silence, the city shimmering round them. Christian studied her, the proud tilt of her chin, the vulnerability she tried to mask, the fierce dignity she didn't realize she wore like armor. "What do you do now?" he asked. "I paint," she said. "I teach children during the day and paint at night. It's not glamorous, but it's honest." Christian's eyes softened. "Art is never just honest. It's truth. It's what remains when everything else is gone." Juliet blinked. She had expected condescension, not understanding. "Most businessmen think art is frivolous." "They're wrong," he said. "I collect art, real art, not just because it looks good on a wall, but because it says what words can't." For the first time, Juliet felt seen, not as a fallen heiress, not as a charity case, but as a woman with something to offer. "I have a proposition," Christian said suddenly. She arched an eyebrow. "I'm restoring part of my personal collection. I'd like your help. Paid work, restoration. You'd have access to pieces most people only see behind glass." She blinked. "Why me?" "Because I've seen the way you carry yourself," he replied. "And because someone like you doesn't belong on the sidelines." Her heart raced. "I don't want charity." "Good," he said, slipping a card into her hand. "I don't give it." Just then, Delilah appeared, concern reddened across her face. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "I'm fine," Juliet said, as still locked with Christian's. "When would you need an answer?" she asked. "Tomorrow," he replied. "Call me." As she and Delilah walked away, Christian remained on the terrace, watching the light fade from the sky and feeling, for the first time in years, that something real had just happened. Juliet Rayner awoke to the soft rays of morning light streaming through the threadbare curtains of her small Brooklyn studio. Her first instinct was to believe that the previous night had been a dream, a lavish ballroom, a torn gown, a conversation under moonlight with Christian Maddox. But then she spotted the thick business card resting atop her nightstand. She reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing the elegant embossed lettering. The weight of the card, the crispness of its design, they were real. Proof that the man who stood at the summit of the business world had spoken to her, offered her something beyond fleeting kindness. Her phone buzzed. A text from Delilah lit up the screen. "Are you okay? Last night was a lot. Call me when you're ready to unpack." Juliet smiled softly until her phone rang again. This time, an unknown number. Her breath caught. She answered with hesitant curiosity. "Hello, good morning, Juliet." The voice was unmistakably warm, rich with confidence. "I hope I'm not calling too early." She blinked, heart accelerating. "Christian, I was wondering," he continued, "if you'd be open to seeing the collection today. I know it's short notice, but I'm genuinely excited to hear your thoughts." Juliet looked around her apartment, canvases stacked in corners, tubes of paint scattered like confetti, a coffee mug with a chipped rim sitting half full beside yesterday's sketch. In any other world, this would feel laughably incompatible with the world Christian lived in. But instead, something in his tone made her believe the gap between them wasn't so wide. "I'd love to," she said quietly, and meant it. The mansion on the hill. 2 hours later, she stood in front of a 5-story limestone mansion nestled along the Upper East Side. It looked like it had been plucked from the pages of a European fairy tale. Ornate stonework, ivy-kissed balconies, and windows that gleamed like polished jewels. A doorman in a perfectly tailored uniform greeted her with a gracious nod. "Miss Rayner, welcome." Inside, the entryway unfurled like a palace, towering ceilings, cascading marble staircases, and a gentle scent of fresh gardenia. Christian met her at the door with a smile that was both charismatic and disarming. He wore dark jeans and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Somehow, he looked even more striking in casual attire than he had in his tuxedo. "Welcome to my home," he said, taking her jacket gently. "I hope it's not too intimidating. I figured this was better than an office visit. The collection's too large to move." "It's beautiful," Juliet murmured, her artist's eye soaking in the balance of space, light, and detail. "It belonged to my grandfather," Christian explained. "I tried to keep his spirit alive while still making it livable." As they walked through the mansion, Juliet couldn't help but admire the thoughtful curation of the artwork, a mixture of old masters and provocative contemporary pieces that challenged traditional norms. "You have an incredible eye," she said, stopping in front of a Monet landscape. "This one, I've only seen it in books. It's one of my favorites," he admitted, standing beside her. "Something about how he captured light, even on the gloomiest days, reminds me that there's always a sliver of hope." She turned, startled by the vulnerability in his words. "Art has a way of holding our feelings when we can't carry them ourselves." Their eyes met, a lingering moment suspended in quiet gravity. The restoration room. He led her to a sun-drenched room toward the back of the mansion, a dedicated studio space that rivaled any professional conservation lab she'd ever seen. Natural light spilled in from skylights, while specialized restoration equipment lined the walls. But what stole her breath were the canvases. "These are incredible," she whispered, stepping closer to a damaged portrait. "Many came from estate sales," Christian said, joining her. "Pieces people sold without realizing what they had, or because they needed the money more than the beauty." Juliet understood that intimately. Her own family had sold cherished possessions piece by piece to stay afloat in the final years. It still haunted her watching the past disappear. "This one could be spectacular," she murmured, inspecting a portrait where time and water had obscured the delicate features of a woman's face. "There's real mastery underneath the grime." "How long would it take?" Christian asked, leaning in to examine it with her. "Depends. Could be weeks, maybe months. Restoration can't be rushed." "Time isn't the concern," he said, "only quality." For the first time in years, Juliet felt herself relax, not because she was in luxury, but because someone was finally speaking to her as an equal, respecting her skill, not her surname. Lunch in the conservatory. After an hour of examining the collection, Christian led her to a sunlit conservatory where lunch had been prepared. It was simple roasted vegetable soup, artisan bread, and a fresh spring salad, yet tasted better than most gourmet meals Juliet had eaten. "This is delicious," she said between bites. "My housekeeper's a genius. I'd be living off delivery otherwise." As they ate, he asked, "What do you paint when it's just for you?" She hesitated, not used to people asking that sincerely. "Cityscapes, the way light shifts the meaning of a place depending on time of day or season. I try to show that even the ugliest corners have beauty if you're willing to look." "I'd love to see your work sometime. It's different, more personal, smaller. I use whatever canvases I can afford. Sometimes I stretch fabric over wood from the hardware store." Christian's gaze softened. Some of the most meaningful art in history was created with scraps and borrowed paint. Most wealthy men don't see it that way. "Most wealthy men are wrong about a lot of things," he said with a shrug. Juliet laughed, not from humor, but from the joy of being understood. The painting that changed everything. After lunch, Christian showed her to a smaller room where she could eventually set up a more permanent workspace. As she arranged a few of her own tools from her tote bag, her eyes fell on a painting leaning casually against a corner wall. She froze. It was a lake surrounded by mountains, all on canvas, the brushwork raw and emotional. Her heart thundered in her chest. "Christian," she said, voice tight, "where did this come from?" He looked over, curious. "That one came with a lot one purchased about 2 years ago at an estate auction. I haven't traced its origin yet." Juliet stepped forward, flipping the painting with trembling hands. On the back, faded in pencil, were the words, "Lake Haven, Summer, R. Rainer, 1995. Tears filled her eyes. This is my father's," she whispered. "He painted it the summer before I started high school. We stayed in a cabin by Lake Haven for 2 weeks. It was the last time I saw him truly at peace." Christian stood still beside her. "He sold most of his work before he died. I thought it was all gone." Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms. She collapsed into him, the emotion too much to hold back. Sobs racked her body, not from weakness, but from years of unresolved grief, of watching memories fade and legacies vanish. He held her not with pity, but with reverence. He didn't try to fix it. He simply stayed, an offer from the heart. When she finally pulled away, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I don't fall apart like this." "Never apologize," Christian said, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "Grief doesn't obey calendars. I miss him so much. I'll have the painting delivered to your apartment tonight," he said. "No, I can't accept that. You bought it. Some things belong with the people who love them," he replied. "This is one of those things." Their faces lingered inches apart, and then a shift. Not quite romantic, not quite professional, but undeniably meaningful. "I have another proposition," Christian said. "Not just the restoration work." Juliet tensed. "I want to sponsor an exhibition of your work, a real gallery opening, and I want to offer you a full-time position restoring my collection, a salary that lets you paint without worrying about groceries or overdue rent." The offer stunned her. "Why?" she asked. "Is this about my talent or something else?" He looked at her, full of honesty. "Both. I would have made the offer based solely on your work. But yes, I haven't stopped thinking about you since the gala." She swallowed hard. "Christian, I need to know this isn't about rescuing me." "It's not," he said. "It's about seeing something rare and wanting to nurture it." The choice. Silence stretched between them. She stared at the painting, then back at the man who had appended everything. "I need time," she whispered. "This is happening fast." "Of course," Christian said. "No pressure. But I want to start with the restoration, at fair market value. Nothing more. Let me prove myself, then we talk about the rest." His smile was luminous. "Deal. When can you start?" "Tomorrow." "Perfect." He walked her to the door, where a car waited to take her home. As she stepped in, he touched the edge of the frame. "Juliet," he said softly, "thank you for giving me the chance to know you." She didn't reply, not because she didn't want to, but because her heart was too full. 3 weeks had passed since Juliet Rainer had walked into Christian Maddox's mansion with trembling hands and cautious hope. What began as a consulting role had transformed into something far more meaningful for both of them. Each morning, she arrived at the Grand Limestone estate with her portfolio tucked under one arm, hair tied back, sleeves rolled. The restoration studio had become her sanctuary, not just a place to work, but a place where she felt seen, respected, valued. Christian visited her every afternoon like clockwork. He'd bring her coffee, always the same, oat milk latte, extra hot, and stay to chat about everything from painting styles to their childhood memories. His questions weren't superficial. He wanted to understand the mechanics of her passion, the why behind each brushstroke. And in return, Juliet let him in slowly, carefully. They laughed over stories from their teenage years, shared music playlists, even debated color theory. Their hands often brushed while examining a canvas, and every time, Something unspoken bloomed in the silence that followed. And yet, beneath the joy, Juliet felt the tremors of unease. There was one question she hadn't asked, one suspicion she had buried beneath layers of new beginnings. She had chosen not to dig into the past until the past came knocking. The unwelcome messenger. On a chilly Tuesday morning, Julie arrived at the mansion to find Carmen Alvarez Christian's longtime assistant waiting in the foyer. Carmen usually greeted her with a bright smile and a cup of tea, but today, her face was tight. Her eyes filled with something Juliet hadn't seen before. Concern, dread. Juliet, she said softly, we need to talk. Privately, a cold knot twisted in Juliet's stomach. They moved to the library, its tall shelves silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Carmen pulled a thick folder from her leather tote and placed it on the table. I've been with Christian for 8 years, Carmen began, her voice trembling. I've handled everything from travel logistics to legal filings. Yesterday, while organizing old email archives, I found something. She opened the folder. Juliet leaned in. Email chains, internal memos, private correspondence between Marcus Maddox Christian's father and several powerful business associates. The subject line on many of them was familiar. Rainer Technologies. Juliet's blood ran cold. What is this? Carmen's voice was steady, but pained. Your father's company didn't collapse because of bad luck or market shifts. Marcus Maddox orchestrated its downfall. Juliet's fingers shook as she read the cold, calculated language. Delay payments to Rainer's suppliers, leak rumors about their solvency, convince key clients to terminate contracts. If he refuses to sell, destroy the brand value until acquisition is the only option. Tears welled in Juliet's eyes. I don't understand. Why? Your father's innovations were years ahead, Carmen said. Marcus wanted them for Maddox Technologies. When Robert refused to sell, he made him pay. The final document hit like a knife a bank's internal memo. Per Maddox's recommendation, calling in loan terms immediately. Juliet could barely breathe. Christian, he didn't know, Carmen said. He was in grad school at the time. Marcus kept this hidden buried deep. Juliet looked up, anguish washing over her features. How can you be sure? I found out yesterday, Carmen said. Christian found out the same time I did. He asked me to bring this to you. The words barely registered, because the man she was falling for was the son of the man who destroyed her life. A heartbreaking confrontation. As if summoned by her heartbreak, Christian appeared in the doorway of the library. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles beneath his eyes, tight-loosened, tension gripping every line of his face. You know, he said quietly. Juliet stood, her face pale, her green eyes burning with betrayal. You knew your father destroyed my family. I didn't, Christian said quickly, stepping forward. Not until yesterday. Carmen and I. She took a step back. You benefited from it, she said, her voice sharp. Your empire was built on the ashes of what my father created. My childhood home, my father's dreams, his life, all gone because of your name. I know, he said, and I swear to you, Juliet, I didn't know what he did. I was in London, focused on graduate research. My father never shared details, but you lived the benefits, she snapped. While my mother worked jobs to keep us afloat, while I sold my father's paintings to make rent, you were flying private and buying mansions. Tell me how I'm supposed to look at you and not see what your family did. Christian's voice cracked. You're right. I can't defend it, but I'm going to fix it. Fix it, her voice rose. Fix a dead father. 5 years of being called the daughter of a fraud. How exactly do you plan to fix that? Silence engulfed them. Carmen slipped out quietly, leaving them alone with the debris of what had once been growing between them. Juliet turned away, arms wrapped around herself. I thought I could trust you, she whispered. Christian took a step closer, but didn't touch her. I didn't lie to you, Juliet. I swear, I didn't know. But you do now, she said, and that changes everything. Father and son. Later that evening, Christian stood before the heavy oak doors of his father's office at Maddox Industries. He didn't knock. Marcus Maddox looked up from his desk, dressed immaculately in a dark three-piece suit, sipping aged scotch. To what do I owe the visit? Christian threw the printed emails onto the desk. His father barely glanced at them. Ancient history. Business, Marcus corrected. Rainer was a weak man with valuable tech. I just accelerated the inevitable. You murdered him, Christian spat. Not with a gun, but with greed. Marcus stood, smoothing his jacket. Don't be melodramatic. Men like Rainer exist to be consumed. That's how the world works. Not anymore, Christian said coldly. Not in my world. His father scoffed. You're throwing it all away for a girl. I'm saving it, Christian replied. Because if this is what we've built, it deserves to burn. A reckoning and a choice. That night, Christian called an emergency board meeting. In a conference room filled with shareholders and executives, he stood tall. We will be establishing a fund to compensate families and businesses harmed by our acquisition strategies, he announced. Effective immediately, we will adopt ethical review policies and terminate all predatory practices. The room fell into stunned silence. You're ruining us, Marcus hissed. No, Christian said. I'm freeing us. He walked away from his father, from the legacy of corruption towards something better. But Juliet didn't know any of this yet. She sat on the fire escape of her apartment, staring at the stars, unable to paint, unable to sleep, unable to stop asking the question, can you love someone who carries the blood of your enemy? Delilah sat beside her, silent for a while. He didn't lie to you, she said gently. He's trying to make it right. But his father is not him. Juliet's eyes brimmed again. I don't know how to forgive him. Then you'll lose something extraordinary because of someone else's sin. Juliet Rainer hadn't touched a paintbrush in over 14 days. The canvases lining her tiny Brooklyn apartment had grown silent not for lack of inspiration, but because her soul was too full of noise to create anything beautiful. She had spent countless hours walking aimlessly through Central Park, sitting in coffee shops with untouched drinks, and staring at blank pages that refused to absorb color. Her heart ached, not just from the betrayal of discovering who Christian's father truly was, but from the cruel irony of falling for the son of the man who had destroyed her family. She didn't answer Christian's calls. She didn't respond to his texts, but she read every word. I understand if you hate me. Please let me explain what I've done to make things right. The truth nearly broke me too, and still, she remained silent. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening, she found herself seated on the fire escape, legs curled beneath her, watching the city slowly light up as dusk settled over Brooklyn. Delilah Fontaine appeared in the window behind her, pushing it open with a sigh and climbing out to sit beside her. I brought wine, Delilah said, offering a bottle and a plastic cups. It seemed like a Pinot Noir kind of crisis. Juliet smiled faintly. I don't think wine can fix this. Maybe not, Delilah replied. But friends can help you think clearly while you're drinking it. They sipped in silence for a moment. Then Delilah asked, do you love him? That's not the point. It's the only point that matters. Juliet exhaled slowly. How do I forgive someone who's tied to the worst thing that ever happened to me? Delilah looked out at the skyline, thoughtful. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means choosing to believe in who he is, not who raised him. What if I can't separate the two? Then you'll walk away from something beautiful because of someone else's sins. The wind carried their silence, but Juliet's heart began to shift. Not fully, but enough to consider something she hadn't in days. What if Christian wasn't the villain? What if he was the beginning of healing? The invitation. The next morning, Juliet received a package, a cream-colored envelope, thick with weight and adorned in elegant calligraphy. Her name was etched across the front in gold ink, Juliet Rainer. Inside was an invitation. The Morrison Gallery cordially invites you to the opening of its new exhibition, Cityscapes in Stillness Works by J. Rainer. She blinked. For a moment, she wondered if it was a cruel joke, but tucked inside was a handwritten note. Juliet, you deserve to have your work seen not because of me, but because it deserves to be seen. This exhibition will happen with or without my presence in your life, but I hope you'll come. Christian, she clutched the letter to her chest. He hadn't pressured her. He hadn't tried to buy her forgiveness. He had simply believed in her. For the first time since discovering the truth, she allowed herself to cry not from pain, but from something softer, something closer to relief. The opening night, Juliet arrived at the Morrison Gallery wearing a simple navy gown she had purchased with her own earnings from the restoration work, one that hugged her curves modestly and brought out the green in her eyes. Her hair was swept into a soft updo, and the only jewelry she wore was her grandmother's silver locket. As she stepped into the gallery, her breath caught. Her paintings, her cityscapes lined the walls beneath warm lights that made them shimmer like dreams. Each one told a story of survival, of resilience, of a city that could be both cruel and breathtaking. She had painted fire escapes, rain-soaked windows, children playing in alleyways, the glow of traffic lights on winter streets, the overlooked corners of New York that had kept her grounded when everything else had fallen apart. "Excuse me," said a soft voice beside her. Juliet turned to find a woman in her 60s, dressed in a silk shawl and round glasses. "Are you the artist?" Juliet nodded. "They're extraordinary," the woman whispered, gazing at a piece titled Midnight Between Avenues. "There is such honesty in the light. It reminds me why I fell in love with art in the first place." "Thank you," Juliet whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The praise continued throughout the evening. Critics, buyers, young artists, gallery staff, but none of it prepared her for the moment she turned and saw him. The reunion. Christian stood near the entrance in a black tailored suit, hands folded in front of him, his face unreadable. He wasn't trying to dominate the room. He wasn't working the crowd. He was just waiting. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, the buzz of the gallery faded, the voices dimmed, and the city itself seemed to hold its breath. Juliet handed her a wine glass to a nearby server and crossed the floor toward him. Each step was a choice to listen, to try, to maybe believe. "You came," he said softly when she reached him. "It's my exhibition," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't the real reason she had walked toward him. Christian gestured to the paintings. "Seeing them like this, I understand now. You see beauty where others only see grit. You turn survival into light." Juliet swallowed the emotion threatening to spill. "Christian, I know I can't undo what my father did," he said, voice thick. "I can't bring your father back. I can't fix the years you lost. But I can promise you that I'm not him, and I never will be." She looked into his eyes and saw no lies, no manipulation, just raw sincerity. He continued, "I've established a foundation in your father's name, the Robert Rayner Foundation for Emerging Artists. Scholarships, grants, workshops, all for talented artists who don't have financial support." Juliet's breath caught. "You named it after him?" Christian nodded. "Because he deserves to be remembered for his brilliance, not for the way my father tried to erase him. I want his legacy to inspire others the way it inspired you." Her vision blurred. All this time, she had feared that loving Christian meant betraying her father, but now, it felt like honoring him. "What happens now?" she asked, voice trembling. Christian reached for her hands. "Now, we build something together, if you'll have me." The first kiss. It began as a breath, then a tilt of her chin, and then their lips met. Soft and slow, a kiss filled with forgiveness and truth, with longing and redemption. Round them, the gallery buzzed, but inside that kiss was everything they needed: a promise to try, to rebuild, to hope again. And for the first time in years, Juliet Rayner felt like her heart was hers again, not fractured, not waiting, but whole. The soft sound of string instruments floated through the warm spring air, wrapping round the limestone arches and marble statues of the Maddox Mansion's conservatory. Sunlight spilled through the glass-paneled ceiling, bathing everything in golden glow, a blessing from the sky itself. Juliet Rayner stood at the threshold of the aisle, her hand gently resting on the arm of Delilah Fontaine, her dearest friend and maid of honor. Her heart thudded steadily beneath layers of silk and lace. She wore a gown made by a rising designer whose first commission had been funded by the Robert Rayner Foundation, a dress inspired not by royalty, but by rebirth. Round her neck hung the same locket her mother had worn on her wedding day. Inside it, a tiny portrait of her father and a pressed lavender petal from their last family trip to Lake Haven. She stepped forward. Each stride was a whisper of memory from the night of humiliation in a borrowed gown to the moment Christian saw through it all. Now, the world saw her too, not as a girl rescued by wealth, but as a woman who turned loss into beauty, survival into strength. Christian Maddox waited for her beneath an arch of orchids and magnolia, his eyes shimmering with reverence as she walked toward him. A ceremony of meaning. The conservatory wasn't packed with strangers or distant relatives. It was intimate, intentional. Carmen Alvarez stood beside Christian, his best woman steady and proud. Delilah, radiant in lavender, beamed at Juliet with a look only years of sisterhood could birth. There were no camera crews, no business deals whispered between rows, only love and the people who had walked beside them through fire. Absent, of course, was Marcus Maddox. He had been removed from the board of Maddox Industries shortly after Christian's restructuring began. His fall from power was quiet, but permanent, a man buried by the very empire he had once built on manipulation. Under Christian's leadership, the company had become smaller, but far more respected. New partnerships bloomed based on innovation, not intimidation. And most importantly, integrity replaced strategy as the brand's cornerstone. As the efficient spoke, Juliet's eyes never left Christian's. He took her hands, and in a voice thick with emotion, he began, "I promised you once that I would never try to erase our past, only build a future where they no longer hold power over us. Today, I vow to honor the memory of your father, not with words, but with a life lived in compassion, in fairness, in love. You gave me a reason to choose better, not just in business, but in my soul." Juliet's tears spilled freely, but her voice was steady when she replied, "You taught me that love doesn't wait for perfect circumstances, it grows in the cracks of broken things. You never tried to save me, you made space for me to save myself. And now, I choose you not for your name, but for your heart." Their kiss was not thunderous, not cinematic. It was soft, still, deep with knowing, and yet, everyone who witnessed it felt the air change, as if the world had sighed and whispered, "This is what love looks like." A legacy in motion. 5 years later, Juliet and Christian stood inside a bright, modern gallery on the Lower East Side, a new wing of the Robert Rayner Foundation dedicated to emerging artists. Paintings lined the walls. Installations stood beneath natural skylights. Music drifted from a student-led quartet in the corner. Families, students, donors, and young dreamers mingled among the works, marveling at pieces born from passion and persistence. Juliet stood beneath a portrait of her father, not the businessman, but the artist. A photo taken at Lake Haven in the summer of 1995. Sunlight bouncing off the lake behind him, brush in hand, canvas at his feet. "Do you think he'd be proud?" she asked. Christian stood behind her, arms gently encircling her waist. "I think he'd be amazed," he said softly, "by what his daughter created and who she became." Near the gallery's education corner, their twin daughters Hope and Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by art supplies and other children. Hope, the quieter one, was deep into a watercolor of a city skyline. Grace, bolder, painted a fierce red heart across a black canvas. "They're going to rule the world," Juliet said with a smile. "With love and acrylics," Christian added, "a future forged by choice." As twilight settled over the city, Juliet stepped onto the small rooftop garden overlooking the skyline. Christian followed, setting the cups of tea on the nearby table. The same skyline she once painted on scraps of canvas now shimmered like an old friend, no longer out of reach, no longer intimidating. It was home. "You ever think about that night?" she asked, her eyes locked on the glow of distant towers. The gala, the dress, the moment everything changed. "All the time," Christian said. "I thought my life had ended." "It had," he said gently. "The old one did, and we built something better." She turned to him, heartful. "We made something beautiful from ashes." He kissed her forehead, because you were brave enough to let it burn. The spring that followed the 5-year anniversary of the Robert Rayner Foundation had been unusually peaceful. Juliet Rayner spent her mornings at the gallery working with young artists, curating new exhibitions, and teaching workshops to students who reminded her of who she had once been. In the afternoons, she painted in her private studio, a sunlit room tucked behind ivy-draped windows in their townhouse near Gramercy Park. Christian Maddox, now the CEO of a leaner, ethically driven Maddox Industries, had settled into a new rhythm, one where board meetings were shorter. His phone was off at dinner, and bedtime stories were sacred. Hope and Grace, now 5 years old, had taken to leaving colorful crayon notes beneath their parents' pillows. "Daddy, can I paint a dragon with you tomorrow? Mommy, your hair looks like the sun today." Their lives were quieter now, grounded, until the letter arrived. The letter without a return address. It was Juliet who opened the manila envelope that had arrived without fanfare. There was no return address, no postmark, just her name, written in looping cursive, the kind her father had used in the margins of his sketchbooks. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo was old, weather-worn, but unmistakable. Her father, Robert Rayner, seated in front of an unfinished oil painting. Behind him, a group of men in tailored suits, none smiling. One of them, Juliet recognized with a jolt, was not Marcus Maddox, but someone else, a man she had once overheard in late-night conversations as a child. A name associated with whispered tension. The letter was brief. He didn't sell because he knew what they were doing. He tried to protect something far more valuable than patents or software. Ask yourself why so much was buried. A friend of the original dream. Juliet's fingers trembled. She stared at the photo again. Her father's expression was guarded, wearing not the gentle smile she remembered from Lake Haven. Beneath the photo, in faded pencil, were initials. D. What he tried to protect. That evening, Juliet sat in her studio long after the girls were asleep. She didn't paint. She didn't clean brushes. She didn't sip tea. She stared at the letter. Christian found her there. His brow furrowed the moment he saw the tension in her posture. "What is it?" She handed him the envelope. He read silently, slowly, twice, and then he exhaled. This changes things. "You recognize the name?" Christian nodded. "Dominic Ashford. He was once the lead architect at your father's tech firm. Disappeared right before the company collapsed. Rumor was he turned whistleblower, but no documents ever surfaced." Juliet rubbed her temples. "What was my father protecting?" Christian sat beside her. "Maybe more than just his work. Maybe people. Maybe proof. I can look into it discreetly." Juliet paused, then looked him in the eye. "Do we want to go backward?" His silence was answer enough, because they both knew some truths, once unearthed, refused to stay quiet. The missing archive. The following week, Christian made a quiet visit to a former archivist who had worked for Rayner Technologies. Through private sources and old contacts, they located a forgotten storage facility in New Jersey, once still registered under a dissolved shell company once owned by Robert Rayner. Inside, covered in dust and time, were boxes, dozens, thousands of pages of internal memos, blueprints, hand-drawn schematics, even personal notebooks, all meticulously preserved. And in one locked drawer, a file labeled "Project Other Legacy Notes" for Juliet. Christian's throat tightened. He placed the file into a protective case and returned home. Juliet's inheritance. They opened it together the evening in the quiet glow of the study, the girls asleep upstairs. The first page was written in her father's hand. "Juliet, if you're reading this, it means they failed to silence everything. I couldn't protect the company, but I could protect you. There's more to what I created than business. Ether was meant to be a system that gave voice and protection to independent creators, artists, inventors, thinkers, people like you. They didn't want freedom. They wanted control. If you choose to revive Ether, you won't be alone, but it won't be safe either. Whatever you choose, know this. You are my masterpiece. Love, Dad." Juliet wept quietly, and Christian held her until dawn. The decision. The following week, They stood inside the foundation's boardroom with Carmen, Delilah, and a few trusted advisors. Juliet laid the file on the table. "This is bigger than me," she said. "But it started with my father, and I wanted to continue with me." They debated, planned, risk-assessed, and finally they agreed. Project Ether would be revived as an independent, artist-owned platform, a digital space for creators to protect, share, and monetize their work, free from corporate influence. Juliet would lead the initiative. Christian would support it, but not steer it, because this wasn't about his legacy. It was about hers. A storm, but not a war. The media caught wind slowly, a press release here, a leak there. Old enemies began to stir. Some scoffed, others threatened. But Juliet stood at the podium of the launch press conference in a pale gray suit, her locket resting over her heart, and spoke calmly. Ether is not a company. It's a return to something sacred, the right to create, to own, to express without being consumed. It was my father's unfinished dream, and now it's mine to finish. The applause was slow, then thunderous, and somewhere in the back, Christian watched with a proud, quiet smile, knowing the storm had come, but they were ready. Together, from the moment Project Ether launched, the art and tech communities alike buzzed with curiosity. Juliet Rayner had stepped into a spotlight she had never sought. Her voice echoed across interview stages and panel discussions as she passionately spoke about intellectual ownership, artistic autonomy, and her father's legacy. Kristen Maddox remained largely in the background, not silent, but deliberately supportive from a distance. "He's not the face of this," Juliet told the press more than once. "This is about creators reclaiming their space." But as the project gained momentum, so did whispers from the past, whispers that took shape as men in tailored suits and cold smiles began surfacing with questions. They weren't from the art world. They weren't creators. They were gatekeepers, those who had once profited from controlling the very voices Ether aimed to uplift. And some of them had history with Robert Rayner, a name from the shadows. Late one afternoon, Juliet was sorting through archived files in her father's old journals when she came across a reference. Calder meeting postponed. "Watch your back." She paused. The name triggered a vague memory. A boardroom, a loud voice. Her father returning home, pale, silent, and more distant than usual. Juliet circled the name. That evening, while Christian was tucking in the girls, she opened her laptop and began to dig. Sterling Calder, a former venture capitalist turned private equity magnate. His name had vanished from the press around the same time Rayner Technologies collapsed. No articles, no public records, but whispers on old industry firms tied him to acquisition sabotage and hostile takeovers. "Why does this feel like more than coincidence?" she murmured. She called Christian into the study. "Do you know this name?" He stiffened at the screen. "Sterling Calder. My father spoke of him once. They worked together in the shadows when deals needed to get done without fingerprints." Juliet's heart clenched. "You think he helped destroy my father's company?" "I think," Christian said carefully, "he may have orchestrated more than we ever realized." The meeting, against Carmen's advice, Juliet requested a private meeting with Calder. "I need to look him in the eye," she told Christian. "Not just for me, for my father." The meeting was arranged discreetly at a neutral site, a sleek downtown restaurant where the walls were glass and every seat could be watched. Calder arrived on time. He was older now, silver-haired, sharp-jawed, dressed like a man who still believed he ruled the room. He offered her a smooth smile and said without permission, "Miss Rayner, you're braver than I expected." "I didn't come for compliments," Juliet said, voice steady. "I came for truth." Calder leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Your father was brilliant. Too brilliant. He wanted to build something no one could control. That made him dangerous." Juliet's pulse throbbed in her ears. "So you destroyed him?" Calder smiled faintly. "He destroyed himself. We simply gave gravity a little nudge. You silenced a visionary. We restructured an inefficient market." Juliet leaned closer, her voice quiet but razor sharp. "Your inefficient market was my father's life's work, and it wasn't about profit. It was about protection." For people like me. For people like every child ever now supports. Calder's expression darkened. Be careful, Miss Rayner. You're stirring embers that still burn in powerful hands. Juliet stood slowly. Let them burn. Tensions at home. That night, as Christian reviewed partnership contracts in his home office, Juliet paced the whole way. She hadn't told him the full conversation. Not yet. When she finally entered, he looked up. How did it go? He's worse than your father, she said, folding her arms tightly. He thinks Heather is a threat. Christian nodded slowly. Because it is. Not to society, to control, to the illusion that creativity must bow to capital. She sat across from him, her voice trembling. I don't want to lose what we've built. Not just Heather. You won't, he said softly. But this will get worse before it gets better, won't it? Christian closed his laptop. Yes, and in that silence, they knew the quiet storm had passed, but the real reckoning had only just begun. The hacker's message. 2 days later, Juliet received an anonymous email. No subject line, no sender, just a single attachment, a 45-second audio clip. She clicked play. A hidden recorder in a boardroom. Calder's voice. Rayner's daughter has fire. That could be useful or dangerous. I say we own her before she figures out how deep this really goes. Another voice. And the Maddox boy, Calder, he still thinks he's fixing things. But he was groomed for power. He's just repackaged it with nicer words. Juliet stopped breathing. Was that true? Had Christian been part of this from the beginning, even unknowingly? She closed the file, and for the first time in months, she questioned everything again. The crossroads. Juliet stood in the conservatory later that night, clutching the USB drive that held the clip. Christian entered, sensing her distance. I got a message, she said, from someone inside Calder's network. He listened carefully as she played it. His face paled. They think they can use you, she said, that you're one of them. Christian didn't speak right away. Then, they're wrong. But were they ever right? His silence pierced her, not because he agreed, but because he, too, had wondered that in his darkest hours. I spent my whole life unlearning what my father taught me, he said. But maybe I never fully escaped the mold. Juliet walked to him, pressed the USB into his hand. You need to decide what you believe in now, not because of me, but because if we keep going there can't be any shadows between us. It began with a whisper on social media, a vague post on a niche investor forum, alleging that Project Ether had been built on stolen code from an unreleased Rayner Technologies platform. At first, no one took it seriously, but within hours, screenshots of documents appear on influencer accounts. A shadowy blog published a headline that read, Ether's foundation cracked, Rayner's legacy in question. By noon the next day, the story was everywhere. Art magazines, financial tabloids, and tech news platforms all ran with the rumor. Pundits speculated whether Juliet Rayner had capitalized on sympathy to conceal a stolen framework. By evening, a second headline dropped like a grenade. The Maddox cover-up. Did Christian fund Ether to bury his father's guilt? Juliet stood frozen in front of the television as a panel of commentators dissected her life like a scandalous novel. Christian entered just as the broadcast cut to a still frame of the two of them smiling at the Ether launch, now used as fuel for controversy. The house had never felt quieter. A shattering conversation. I knew this would happen, Juliet said, her voice hollow. The second we challenged the system, it came for us. Christian turned off the television. We'll respond. With proof. With integrity. They don't want integrity, she snapped. They want a spectacle. And someone's feeding them pieces of our lives. Christian narrowed his eyes. You think it was Calder? No, she said. This came from inside. That word inside was a blade between them. For a brief second, they both considered the unthinkable. Someone close to them, someone trusted, had betrayed them. I'll handle it, Christian said. Juliet crossed her arms. Don't shield me. This is my father's name they're burning. He softened. I'm not shielding you. I'm protecting what we've built. Together. She turned away. Then start with honesty. No more secrets. Not one. Christian hesitated, and that silence was answer enough. Shards of trust. That night, Juliet combed through their team records, cross-referencing calendar access, archived communications, and security logs. At 2:17 a.m., she founded a secure email account set up by one of Heather's advisors, disguised beneath layers of alias accounts and timed logins. The sender, Lucas Brenner, a cybersecurity consultant brought in by Christian during Heather's earliest phase, charming, efficient, invisible in the background. He had access to every layer of the infrastructure, and now he had stolen it. Juliet stared at his name in disbelief. Lucas was yours, she whispered aloud, not mine. Confronting the fire, the next morning, Juliet walked into Christian's office. He looked up from his laptop, eyes bloodshot, color undone. I found the leak, she said, tossing a file onto his desk. He opened it and paled. Lucas. She didn't reply, just stared at him. You brought him in, she finally said. You trusted him, and now I'm bleeding for it. Christian stood. I'll have him arrested. I'll issue a statement. She stepped back. It's not just about damage control. It's about why this happened. Christian's voice lowered. You think I wanted this. I think you trusted someone without asking what he could take from us. And I think a part of you still plays the game your father taught you. That struck deep. He sat down, deflated. I wanted to believe Lucas was different. So did I. Silence. Then Christian looked up. You're scared that this isn't just a storm. You're scared it's who I am underneath. Juliet's eyes brimmed. I'm scared I won't survive another betrayal. Glass breaking. The next 48 hours were chaos. Lawyers, press conferences, emergency security audits. Juliet stood in front of a room full of reporters and read from a prepared statement. Heather was founded on transparency, and we will uphold that now. Yes, we were targeted. Yes, there was betrayal, but we will not be defined by it. We will rise from it. Applause followed, but the wounds were still fresh. Behind closed doors, trust had cracked. Like glass spidering beneath weight it was never meant to bear. Christian's choice. That night, Christian entered their bedroom holding a folder. What's that? Juliet asked, exhausted. My resignation from Heather's board, he said. Juliet froze. What? I want to prove something, he said gently. That this isn't about me saving anything. That this is your vision, your legacy, not mine. I'll fund it. I'll protect it. But from the outside, you don't need to do this. I do, he said, because I can't lose you. Not to a headline, not to a ghost from my past, and not because I forgot how much it cost you to believe in me. Tears welled in Juliet's eyes. He stepped closer. Let me step back, so you can rise. She placed her hand over his heart. Don't step too far. I built this with you, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. He kissed her forehead. Then we rebuild. Together. What remains? Lucas was arrested. Sterling Calder vanished again into his underground network. His attempt to destroy Juliet had failed. And while the meteor eventually moved on, the cracks remained. Not in the organization, but in Juliet and Christian. Yet, even fractured glass can hold sunlight. They rebuilt slowly, with daily check-ins, with transparency, with quiet apologies, and louder action. One night, while reading to their daughters beneath a blanket fort, Christian looked at Juliet and said, It still scares me. What does? She asked. That I'll never deserve you. Juliet leaned into him, both girls asleep between them. No one deserves grace, she said. That's what makes it real. 2 months after the betrayal and media firestorm that nearly shattered everything, Project Heather was flourishing in a way Juliet had never imagined possible. The platform had drawn thousands of creators from around the world, artists, poets, coders, filmmakers, all building something that lived outside corporate control. But success, Juliet had learned, always came with a price tag. This time, it arrived in the form of an embossed letter from the Veritas Institute for Global Art, a multi-billion-dollar international foundation known for establishing museums, collecting priceless art, and brokering deals between governments and creators. Inside the envelope was a proposal. Ether's vision aligns with our mission to democratize creative access. We would like to offer a full partnership. Funding $50 million over 3 years. Resources, infrastructure, gallery space in Paris, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. Condition, a voting seat on Ether's executive board. Juliet stared at the final line for a long time. It wasn't just an offer. It was an invitation to influence and a subtle request for control. The boardroom divide. Within 48 hours, Ether's advisory team gathered in the foundation's minimalist boardroom. The Veritas proposal projected on the wall. Carmen Alvarez leaned forward, skeptical. They want to help now. But where were they when you were building this from ashes? Delilah Fontaine, now overseeing Ether's education division, nodded. They'll call it collaboration. But what happens when they want creative control over what's featured, or worse, what's excluded? They're not the enemy, said Julian Coe, the foundation's strategy director. They've funded progressive arts programs for decades. If we want to scale internationally, this is the door. Juliet sat quietly as debates swirled around her. She heard their voices, but her thoughts drifted back to her father, to Project Ether's original blueprint scrawled in his neat handwriting. Power to the artists, not to the institutions. That was the heartbeat of the mission. Could it survive if she let others place their hands on the pulse? I returned from the past. That evening, Christian waited for her in the conservatory with 2 glasses of wine and a frown etched deep into his brow. I got a call today, he said as she settled beside him. From someone I never thought I'd hear from again. Juliet raised an eyebrow. Who? Michael Voss. Her breath caught. Michael Voss was Christian's mentor during his early years at Maddox Industries, a sharp strategist and ruthless acquisition specialist who had taught Christian everything about corporate warfare before he walked away from it all. I thought he retired after your father's fall. He didn't, Christian said. He went private, built his own boutique firm. Now he wants back in with me. He offered to buy its several struggling tech firms the Ether uses for infrastructure. Quietly, strategically, Juliet stiffened. So he can own the pipes we rely on. Christian nodded grimly. He says it's a safety net. A shield. Juliet stood. It's a leash. Christian met her eyes. I didn't accept, but I didn't say no either. Her silence stretched long. Finally, she said, you can't dance with ghosts and expect them not to haunt you. The choice beneath the surface. That night, Juliet walked the halls of their townhouse like a woman holding her breath. Her daughters were asleep. Christian was in his office, but her mind was racing. On the kitchen table lay both proposals Veritas's offer and the summary of Voss's suggested acquisitions. One offered Power Mask as partnership. The other offered protection that smelled like chains. And both asked her to compromise the very thing her father had died protecting: independence. Her phone buzzed, a message from a young artist in Nairobi whose Ether gallery had just gained international attention. You gave us a stage we never thought we'd stand on. Please don't let them take it from us. Juliet closed her eyes. The speech. 3 days later, Juliet stood at the front of Ether's annual summit, a gathering of creators from every continent. The room pulsed with energy, a sea of color, expression, and possibility. Behind her, on a massive screen, flashed one of her father's quotes. The world will always try to own the beautiful, but beauty belongs to those brave enough to protect it. She took a breath. When my father first envisioned Ether, he didn't know it would outlive him. He only knew it had to begin somewhere, with someone. She paused, scanning the faces before her. Today, we have an opportunity to grow. Veritas has offered their resources. Michael Voss has offered strategic protections. And while we're grateful for the attention, we're not for sale. A hush swept over the room. We will grow slower, but stronger. We will partner carefully, but never for the price of our freedom. And we will remain, always, a platform by artists, for artists. The applause thundered. Christian watched from the wings, a rare tear brimming in his eye. And for the first time in weeks, Juliet felt peace. the light that shines through. That evening, Christian entered the studio, where Juliet was painting a quiet seascape in soft violet and gold. He waited until she looked up. "No ghosts," he said. She smiled softly. "You sure?" He held up his phone, displaying an email draft titled, "Resignation Maddox Holdings Voting Rights and Other Infrastructure." She walked to him slowly, pressed her forehead to his. "You're the only one who gets to stand beside me. I wouldn't have it any other way." In the background, the girls giggled upstairs, paint already staining their pajamas. And downstairs, in a quiet room where their love had once begun, Juliet added the final brushstroke, not to the painting, but to her decision. They would move forward, without shadows, without strings, only light because, as her father once wrote, that's where the cracks are and where the light gets in. The discovery came by accident. Juliet had been preparing a small exhibition for a children's art program hosted at the Robert Rayner Foundation. In one corner of the storage room, she uncovered a worn wooden crate containing several of her father's older, unsigned canvases works from his earliest years before he had found recognition in tech or art. One painting in particular caught her eye, a dusk landscape of a lake, familiar but unfinished, with visible brushstrokes tapering off into uncertainty. Lake Haven, but stripped of light. Unlike his other works, this one was almost haunted. When she flipped the frame over, a sealed envelope was glued beneath the backing. Carefully, breath held, she peeled it off. It was addressed in her father's handwriting, "To my daughter. If I run out of time." Juliet's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The truth they never told her. Inside the envelope was a single folded letter, slightly yellowed. "My darling Juliet, if you're reading this, it means my time was shorter than I hoped. You've probably heard the headlines, maybe even the whispers about failures, suicide, betrayal, but none of them tell the truth. What they don't know, what I never told anyone, is that I knew I was sick. Months before the company fell apart, I was diagnosed with late-stage lymphoma. I didn't want to burden you or your mother, not when we were already under siege from Maddox and Calder. So I made a choice. I used my last strength to protect what mattered most, not the company, but you. I created Ether as my goodbye, my legacy. But I didn't want you to carry the weight of my illness. I wanted you to remember me strong. You were always the strongest part of me. Never forget that. I love you not for what you become, but for how fiercely you fight for truth. Always." Dad. Juliet read the letter 3 times. Each time, the world shifted a little more beneath her feet. Her father hadn't been broken by Maddox or Calder. He had already been dying, and the story she had spent a decade believing that he had been crushed by greed and sabotage had never been the whole truth. She had built a legacy to avenge a man who had died not just of betrayal, but of secrets he chose not to share. The burden of knowing. That night, Juliet sat across from Christian in the soft lamplight of their study, her father's letter between them. He read it slowly, carefully, his brow furrowed in silent reverence. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "He was protecting you, right until the end." Juliet nodded, her throat too tight for words. Christian reached across the table, taking her hand. "What will you do?" She exhaled shakily. "I don't know. Part of me wants to share it. Let the world see who he really was. That his strength wasn't just in his ideas, but in the way he carried his pain. And the other part wants to bury it back where I found it and let his memory live untouched." Christian held her gaze. "There's no wrong answer, just the one you can live with. A family decision." The next morning, Juliet sat with Hope and Grace at the kitchen table. They were coloring, happily oblivious to the world's complexities. "Girls," she said gently, "can I ask you something?" They both looked up, curious. "If someone you love did something brave, but also sad, would you want to tell the world, or keep it just for yourself?" Hope tilted her head. "Was it a secret?" "Yes." Grace frowned. "Did they hide it because they were scared?" Juliet paused. "I think because they were trying to protect someone." Grace nodded solemnly. "Then I'd tell. Secrets are heavy." Hope reached out and took Juliet's hand. "But only when you're ready." Juliet smiled, tears in her eyes. Okay, thank you. Telling the world. A week later, Juliet stood in front of a packed auditorium at the Foundation's annual Creators Gala. The press, former critics, young artists, and world-renowned curators filled the seats. Christian watched from backstage, heart thundering in his chest. Juliet stepped up to the podium with quiet purpose. No makeup team, no teleprompter, just the truth. For years, I believed my father died because of corporate sabotage, because he refused to sell what he built, and that is still true partly. But last week, I discovered something else, something deeper. He was sick. He knew he was dying, and he kept it from everyone, even me, to protect our peace. He didn't fight for rather just to preserve a company. He fought to leave something behind that mattered, something that would live longer than his name. And today, I'm here to say this. The truth is rarely simple, but it's always powerful. So let this be my promise to carry his truth with pride, and to continue building a future where no artist has to fight alone. The room rose to its feet. No applause was loud enough for what she had just done, but the silence that followed, respectful, sacred, was louder than anything Juliet had ever known. A legacy reclaimed. That night, Christian took her into his arms as they stood on the roof of the Foundation building, the city below glowing like 1,000 open hearts. You did it, he whispered. No, she replied. We did. Downstairs, young artists danced beneath string lights, their laughter mingling with soft music. Juliet and Christian stood together, hand in hand, no longer weighed down by the past but carried by it. In the distance, the skyline shimmered, and somewhere, in that liminal space between memory and possibility, Juliet felt her father smile. Epilogue. 10 years later, Hope and Grace, now 15, walked into a lecture hall at the Veritas Institute, a place that had once tried to buy control, but now stood as Heather's largest collaborator. Their mother's portrait hung in the lobby. Below it, a single plaque read, Juliet Rayner, artist, daughter, truth teller, and beside that, her father's last painting, Lake Haven, finished by Juliet herself, completed with gold leaf detailing across the sky. In that painting, there was no dusk, only light,